Hello class, my name is Juan Diego Sánchez. I am the professor of the Marketing 1 and Marketing 2 courses. Today we're going to discuss and we're going to cover one of the newest topics in marketing, which is neuromarketing, and we're going to focus this specific theme in unit number 2 of the Marketing 2 class. I am a professor in the Hotel Management School, and let's start with the subject, okay? Basically, when we discuss about neuromarketing, we need to focus on the subject of marketing. We need to focus and understand that we are dealing with people, and we are dealing not only with people, but we are trying to sell not to the client, but to the brain, okay? In this case, that means that we are dealing with very complex decisions. We need to understand the person as a human being, but we also need to understand this person as a neural being. Okay, we have here basically that we're dealing with decisions, and decisions, they are based on either rationality or emotion. So we're going to try to understand, and we're going to try to cover a little bit about human brain and how it works and how it influences our buying decisions. Here we have the very specific and very old theory regarding the two hemispheres. We have the right hemisphere and we have the left hemisphere. As you probably know, the right hemisphere controls the creative part of the brain, the emotional part of the brain, and the left hemisphere of the brain controls the rational part and the analytic part. This is true, but as a matter of fact, the hemispheres, they don't work separately, they work together. We have, in the middle of these two hemispheres, we have something that connects both hemispheres and allow us to think in a more complex way and allow us to use both emotion and rationality at the same time. These two hemispheres, they control basically how we behave and how we act. One particular and funny thing is that our bodies, they are like controlled in an opposite way, because the left hemisphere controls the right part of our bodies and the other way around. Okay, this is true, but we also have something that is located here, which is the frontal lobe, which controls basically the social behavior, the ethics, and the common sense. And we also have something that is called the cerebellum, which is in the back part of the brain, as you can see in the image. This part controls the conscience and also the dreaming part. Every single dream, every single subconscious thing that goes in our brains, it's located in this part of the brain. Okay, this is true, and this is probably one of the oldest theories in human behavior, which is true, but it's not the only division that we have in our brains. Okay, in the same slide that we are covering, you can see that we have three different brains. We have the reptilian brain, we have the limbic brain, and we also have the neocortex brain. The reptilian brain, it is called like that because it's the first brain that the human being developed, and it's basically a brain that controls instincts. It's very basic. It's very similar to an animal brain because it only controls the basic instincts. It doesn't think, it doesn't feel, it just controls your instincts. Then we have the limbic brain. The limbic brain is the emotional brain. It doesn't think, it only can feel emotions, okay? Whether if they are good or bad, it only controls emotions. And finally, we have the neocortex brain, which is the brain that makes us different from the animal kingdom, because it's the brain that allows us to think, that allows us to actually develop some complex thinking and make decisions in a more structural and more specific way, because it's the logical brain, it's the analytic brain, and it's the mathematical brain. Okay, so in just in a second we're going to see this brain in a graphical manner, so you can understand that they are located like in layers. First we have the reptilian, then we have the limbic, and finally we have the neocortex. Then we have something that is called the synapses, which is basically the union or the connection between neurons in our brains. We have basically three different stages. We have the presynapses, the synapses, and finally we have the postsynapses. The synapses is basically when you're trying to think and you're trying to analyze, but you haven't been able to actually develop a full thought. The presynapses is when you see something and there is no possible way that you understand it, because it's a presynapsis. You just see something, you just capture something, but your brain haven't been able to process it yet. And finally, we have the post-synapses, which is basically the complex thinking. In this case, in this stage, A human brain is able to analyze and it's able to comprehend the subject that we are trying to analyze. The tool that we use in neuromarketing to create synapses is basically the reading word. Synapses is not created by images or by emotions, it's created by thinking. Okay, so the writing goes hand by hand with the synapses. If you have a market that it's based on rational thinking and analytical thinking, then you have to give them more words than images because you are trying to obtain synapses out of them. And finally, we have something that is called the neurotransmitters. We're going to cover them in a little while. But neurotransmitters, they are more related to emotions, okay? To emotions and to how we feel and how we act. Here, in this slide, you can see your brain, which we have the three brains we were talking. We have the reptilian, then we have the emotional or limbic, and finally we have the neocortex. As you can see, the neocortex is on the outside of the brain, and it's the brain that allows us to think. The limbic is the one that allows us to feel, and the reptilian is the one that allows us to have instincts, okay? The market that you are trying to sell something is basically based on these brains, because it's not the same to have a limbic market than to have a neocortex market. We can also establish a very general and very specific, very particular relationship between synapses and these three brains. As long as you keep having synapses, that means that you are using more your neocortex. That means that you are dealing with a rational market. You are dealing with a very analytic market, and you are dealing with people that actually they want information and they want to think before they buy the product. If you are dealing with a reptilian or limbic market, probably they are not using as much synapses as the other market will have. In this case, you need to focus on emotions, images, graphic design, not word, because you are not trying to obtain synapses. Basically here you are trying to obtain emotions. So people don't think before they act. Here we have what a neuron will look like in a synaptic process. That means you are trying to actually understand something, but you haven't been able to figure that out yet. Because in this case, you have basically a middle process. That means that in this case, the client or the person is trying to analyze, it's trying to comprehend, but it's not yet there. Because as you can see in the background, the other neurons, they are turned off. Okay? Once you have a post-synaptic process, in that case, you will have like a very complex idea. You will understand what you're trying to analyze. Here, we are dealing with two markets. We're dealing with the presynaptic market, and we are also dealing with the post-synaptic market. In the presynaptic market, people don't think, they just act. They are very impulsive. They are very, like, not thinking, buying decision market. Then we have the post-synapsis, or post-synaptic market, which is this slide. As you can see on the background, you have different neurons, and they are turned on. In this case, that means that people actually comprehend and actually analyze what they are trying to buy. This process is due to every single human behavior, not only in the marketing part, but in this case, we are analyzing people as a market, right, as a buying decision market. So in this case, the postsynaptic market means that you gave them more words, more reading materials, so they understand, they comprehend, and finally they ended up creating their buying decision based on information. Very different from the limbic market, which basically they feel and they ended up making their decision out of emotions. Everything up to here is true, but we also have another division which is called as the lobes. Okay, we have the parietal lobe, we have the occipital lobe, and then we have the temporal lobe. We already discussed the frontal lobe, which is located here, right, in the front of your brain, and it controls the social behavior and ethics and also the common sense. We have the parietal lobe, which is basically located in the middle of the brain. We're going to see this in a graphic way just in a while. But here in the parietal lobe, we are dealing with physical sensations. We are dealing with, for example, when you apply feeling by touching things, okay, you are trying to activate the parietal lobe. This type of markets, they tend to prefer like degustations and participations. That means that you are dealing with people that want to actually feel and touch the product. especially when you are dealing with things that people need to wear, people need to taste. In that case, you need to apply this kind of techniques. For example, tasting, participation, degustations, and things like that. The other lobe, we have the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is located in the back part of your brain, and it controls the visual part. Every single graphic material, for example, a video, a billboard, flyers, in this case, this graphic material, it will go straight to the occipital lobe. The thing is that finally we spend a lot of money in visual material, and the visual material, once we're going to see that just in a while, it has to go through the entire brain to reach the occipital lobe. That means that sometimes it's not as effective as, for example, a degustation will be. But it's still controlled by the occipital lobe, and that means that if you are dealing with a visual market, you are dealing with graphic material. Finally, we have the temporal lobe. We have actually two temporal lobes. They are located right here. They are linked to the hearing part and to the smelling part. That means that if you are applying like smelling marketing, like hearing marketing, for example, radio or smelling essence, that means that you are trying to activate the temporal lobes. These lobes, they are very, very interested because they are connected specifically to the long-term memory. The best example is one particular smell, for example, the hospital smell. When you sense that activates your long-term memory, and that means that you are trying to activate a long-term memory that is located and burned into your brain. So if we want to establish like very strong position on the market, we want to establish a very strong position in the minds, probably we should be using more hearing material or smelling material. Particularly the smelling part is the strongest one, and it's the one that we as companies, we don't tend to use that a lot. So one of the first recommendations of neuromarketing is to try to explode more these lobes, especially the smelling part. Here we have the brain. This will be the lobes that we have. As you can see, in the upper part, the red, orange, and green, it's basically the parietal lobe. In that case, we have the physical part. Then we have the frontal lobe, which is the like purple, pink. Then we have the temporal lobe. As I was saying, we have two. We have one here and one here. It's very strong, and it controls the smelling and the hearing part. And as you can see, the blue one on the back part of your brain is the occipital. So if you want to use graphic material, that means that it goes through your eyes, and it has to go through the frontal lobe, through the temporal lobe, and finally it reaches the occipital lobe. So it's not as effective as the temporal lobe. It depends on the market, it depends of the people you're dealing with, but the thing is that it seems that if you use smelling or hearing, it tends to be more effective than if you use visual materials. Finally, in the brain analysis that we are trying to accomplish, we have the neurochemicals. This slide is in Spanish, but in English is basically the same names. We have 5 different neurotransmitters or neurochemicals, they are like the basics ones, but we have more. Of course, we have more chemicals in our brains, but we have here the dopamine, the serotonin, the oxytocin, noradrenaline, and adrenaline. Okay, the first one, the dopamine controls desire, expectation, motivation. Then we have serotonin that controls happiness, satisfaction. We have oxytocin that controls basically anger. We have noradrenaline, which is fear. And finally, we have adrenaline, which controls emotion, but emotion not in a like sentimental way, more like in a rush, a kind of a emotion thing, like an acceleration of your body. Okay, we have some different sensations. As you can see, for example, love, which I won't say that is love, I will say that is like falling in love, which is a very funny sensation. Here we have that, as you can see, we have 30%, 33% is basically dopamine, 33% is serotonin, and 33% is oxytocin. In that case, that means that you have basically 3 things: happiness, pleasure, and fear. So it's a combination that is very based on pleasure and fear, right? And also happiness. The thing is, when you are trying to deal with people, people tend to fall in love with things, not only with persons, but also with things. So if I can actually create this sensation on a human brain, a consumer human brain, that will stand that this client will be in love with my product. For example, if you see anxiety, the second one on top, that means that you cannot feel expectation. When someone is very anxious, that means that person is basically unable to fulfill their expectations, unable to actually feel any kind of motivations. So these things, they go hand to hand with the emotions, not necessarily with the way we think or the way we analyze things, but more regarding the way we feel. Of course, they influence and they interact with the human buying decisions, but in this case, they tend to act more in the limbic brain and in the emotional part of our brains. Okay, once we have covered up to here the brain analysis, we have one technique which is very important, which is the eye tracking. Here, we need to remember that the left eye is controlled by the right hemisphere. That means that if you want to use graphical material based on emotions, you need to have your straight point and your drawing part, the way you create your graphic material, it should be focused on the left, because the left part of your left eye will capture that image and it will send it straight to your right hemisphere, okay? On the other hand, if we want to use rational graphic material, in that case we need to balance our graphic materials to the right, okay? Here we have something that is called the eye tracking, which is actually based on this theory, which is not a theory, it's actually something that is quite already proven. The eye tracking is basically an example when we create a graphic material and where people actually focus on this ad. That means what is the first thing they see, what is the second, and what is the third. We're going to see two examples. You're going to see just in a second. The red dots, the red parts, in that case, is the first thing that the client saw when they first saw this ad. The green ones, they are the second thing they saw, and if there is no spot, that means that that part of the ad was never seen. I have the first example here. As you can see, it's exactly the same ad. The thing is, in one of those, the lady is watching at the audience, and in the other is watching at the brand, okay? So here in the second slide, you can see what is the eye tracking. In the first one on top, she is looking at me, she is looking at the audience, so I look at her. That is the focus point, the focal point. In this case, yeah, I look at her, probably I will remember her, but if you notice, I never, barely I look at the brand. So the branding part, the most important part, which is the looking at the brand, is not fulfilling this ad. If I use the same ad, which is on the bottom, and I just change the way she looks, she's not looking at me, but she's looking at the brand, then in this case, yeah, I will look at her, but immediately I will look at the brand. So the branding part is fulfilling this part. Okay, I have another example. Then again, in the one when the baby is watching at the audience, I look back at the baby. It's very cute, very funny, but I never see nor the product or nor the message. I turn the baby around, and yeah, I will see the baby, but immediately I will look at the message, and finally I will look at the brand. This particular technique is it's accomplished by some special glasses that you put them on a target market, like a sample of the market, and then the glasses give you the information. These techniques, they are more mechanical and more specific. The idea is to actually try to apply them because they are very, very good and they give you some very scientific information. I have another example here. You can see this message is totally misspelled. It's written in a way that is intentionally wrong, but you can read it because your brain it's analyzing not the middle, but the beginning and the end. This is called a symmetric mental theory. That means that your brain will always remember the first thing and the last thing. That's why you probably remember your first kiss, but you don't remember your third kiss. You probably remember what you had for dinner the day you finished high school, but you don't remember what you ate like 2 days ago. Okay, because you remember the first thing and the last thing. When we create material, when we run marketing campaigns, we need to give people one start and we need to finish that campaign. The worst thing that we can do is not to close things. Okay, we need to give people a closure. That word closure is very important in marketing because you need to have the last word. For example, if you're giving a service, you need to have the last word. You're welcome. Okay, because that will give the client a sensation of closure. Okay, as you can see here, you can read this message because basically you are reading, your brain is capturing the first part and the second part of each word, not the entire word. I have another example here of both symmetrics, eye tracking, and the brain analysis. This is a group of men, a target group of men, and they showed them this car. They were like a focus group. They actually were able to measure their brain behavior with some special machines that they attach to your head, and then it gives you some information. The first two brains that we see on the upper part, it shows that when these men first saw this car, they activate the reptilian part, very instinct, right? Very manly, very instinct, because they saw the car and they feel very excited. Then they give them more information. As you can see, the information tend to be more related to the right hemisphere. That means the information activates the emotional part of this man. And finally, when they give them the price, as you can see, every single part of the right hemisphere turn off and the left hemisphere appear. That means that the price killed the entire process because the rational part told them, okay, you are very excited, you are very emotional, but you cannot pay this price. The last thing that they showed them was the price. So that's a mistake because the closure for these men, it was the price. So they will remember the price. When you are dealing with people and you are trying to give them, try to sell them something, you need to give them the price in the middle, not at the end, because otherwise this will happen. They will remember basically the price, but they won't remember the emotion or the expectation or the neurochemicals that they actually were creating on their brains. Okay, then we have another thing when we're dealing with in marketing or neuromarketing, we have the first and more basic segmentation, men and women. The thing is that when we're dealing with neuromarketing with men and women, in that case, we are dealing with two completely different sets of brains. That means that you need to actually understand both brains and you need to actually try to divide the market because the way we act, the way we behave is very, very different. First, we have women. Women, they have more circuits. That means that they can think faster than we can. They are more strong in a memory capacity. They can actually have a long-term memory way much powerful than we have. They have synaptic capacity almost twice as stronger than we have. That means that they can think very fast, not as fast. We cannot think that at that speed, but women, they actually can overthink us, if you can put it like that. The axonal connections is basically the distance between neurons. That means that in this case, women have almost twice as distance between neurons than men. That means that they can actually send more information than we can at the same time. They can also use both hemispheres. That's why women tend to be multitasking. They can, for example, they can analyze an emotion, but in a rational way, or they can try to rationalize an emotion. It's very funny because that's why women can, for example, understand in a better way the body language. We men, we can do it, but we don't have that specific and that capacity because we can only use one hemisphere at the same time. The thing is that women, they think faster, they have more memory, they have more synaptic capacity. So you can say that they are more intelligent than we are. Women are more intelligent than men. But the thing is that they have a bigger limbic region. That means that they are way much emotional than we are. They have almost 5 times a stronger capacity in the emotional way than the one that we have in the limbic brain. So one woman that can control emotions, it's very powerful. It's a very powerful and amazing brain. They have, the women's brain is one of the most amazing things in human nature. On the other hand, we have us, we have men, we have less circuits, we think in a normal way, we think almost in a 50% way that women tend to think. We can only use one hemisphere. That's why we don't understand body language. We understand reason or we understand emotion. That's why a no for a guy means no, and a yes for a guy means yes. So we cannot understand that two ways messages things. Okay, we have less emotion, but that doesn't mean that we are less emotional. We can feel emotion, we can have feeling, but we don't have the same capacity as women does. Finally, we tend to be more rational. I won't say that we are more intelligent because we are not more intelligent than women, but we are more rational because we have less emotional capacity. So emotional and rationality, they go like they move in a different way. So we tend to be more, let's say, cold, let's say more rational and more, probably more rational thinking based than women tend to be. The words that neuromarketing use for women's brain is adventure, because everything for a woman is an adventure. They think so fast, they think so wonderfully that everything they analyze it, they put emotions, they actually think in a more strong way that we men do. And the word that we use for men in neuromarketing is mission, because a mind is very straightforward. A mind is we are here to do something and that's all, okay? We don't tend to overanalyze things. I have a slide here, which I think describes in a best possible way what goes in our brains. As you can see, when a woman say hello to another woman, they're doing like a scan, right? They're going from the top to the bottom and they remember everything. They remember that if they wear the same clothes last week, they remember if they have when and where they buy that particular cloth. And as you can see, men, we can only say hi straight to the eyes, because the moment that we move our eyes, we lost that thought, okay? We cannot think like using both hemispheres at the same time. So basically, guys, we have a very different market. If you're dealing with women, you can give them more information. You can use both emotion and rationality in your campaigns. You can use different types of materials. You can use graphical, you can use degustations, you can use music. But if you're dealing with men, you need to be very, very specific, very straightforward. You don't have to complicate things, and you need to actually create campaigns that they are very simple and very, let's say, very rational analysis based. Or on the other hand, you need to overcome rationality and only use emotion. But the thing is that when you're dealing with a men's market, you cannot use both at the same time. You cannot use emotion and rationality at the same time. Finally, we have one of the last things we're going to cover today, which is the neural motivation. The neural motivation, we need to see this not as an emotion, because one thing is emotion and another thing is motivation. In this case, motivation is basically a sensation, an impulse. It's something that it's not given in a long time, but it's given in a very short time. We have something that is called the DAS circuit, which actually means desire, action, and satisfaction, or dopamine, adrenaline, and serotonin. This means that when you have motivations, basically you have a desire, then you have the action to obtain that desire, and finally, if you achieve the thing that you were wanting in the first place, you will have satisfaction, okay? Motivation is basically created by promises. So if we are dealing, for example, in publicity with something that is called the basic promise, when you promise something in your campaign, you are trying to create motivation, okay? Then we have something that is called the RAS with 2 A's, which is the reticular ascendant activator system, which is the way motivation acts in our brains. We're going to see just in a while that motivation starts in the reptilian brain. That means that it's something that is very instinct-based creation. It's not something that is an emotional creation or a rational creation. It's more like a very animal impulse thing, okay? Then we have something that is very funny, because if you are dealing with emotions or you are dealing with rationality, you can use almost every part of your brain to try to either rationalize the emotion or emotionalize the rationality. In this case, you cannot, because motivation comes from the inside of the brain. As you can see here, we have what we call the DAS circuit. You can see that the number 1 is where the motivation starts. As you can see, it goes straight to the top. It rises across your brain. It first goes from your reptilian brain into your limbic brain, and finally it comes to your frontal lobe. Once it gets to the frontal lobe, which is the part that you can use to control your motivation, the information is already corrupted in a good way, because you are already, you feel a lot of emotions, you feel a lot of expectations, so you cannot actually rationalize that sensation. Motivation is one of the strongest tools that we have in marketing. The thing is that if you cannot fulfill that expectation, then you won't have motivation. You will have frustration, and frustration is just one step away from losing a client. So it's very careful. We need to be very careful when we use a promise that we cannot fulfill, because in theory, if you go through publicity theory, you can see that the basic promise in a publicity campaign, it could be a false promise. But the thing is that that client won't have any kind of motivation once he or she receives the products. So if the product is meant to be sold just one time, in that case, you can not fulfill the motivation. But every other scenario, when you want the client to keep buying your product, you need to be very careful to actually give them what you promised in the first place. Because in that case, when you give people what you were promising in the first place, then they will experience that serotonin. And serotonin is basically happiness. Okay? It's the neurochemical that controls happiness. I want to finish this class with this exercise. It's a very simple exercise. Here we have a very simple teaser. I want you guys to count the F's, the face F's. How much F's do you see in this slide? Okay, most of the people tend to see 3 or 4. But if you count again, you will see that we have 1 in finish, 1 in false, 1 in off, 1 in off, 1 in scientific, and we also have 1 in off. We have 6 F's. What is the thing here? That when you have words like, they are very long words like scientific or experience or finish, your brain tends to cut the small parts. So a very little word like off, your brain is removing that word, because then again, remember that we have the symmetric theory. We analyze the beginning and then we analyze the end. Your brain is so powerful that the brain never looks at details. The brain looks at the whole picture. So when you're dealing with marketing, when you're dealing with people, when you're dealing with customers, details are important, but the main message and the main promise that you are giving is probably the most important part. So guys, it's been a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed this class and hope you can use these techniques and learn a little bit more about neuromarketing. Thank you very much.